So this past June, Rhodey and I were driving up to Palo Alto to move our daughter Talia out of her apartment. Those of you who have made that drive up the I-5, right, like 5+ hours up there, know it's quite different than when you can take the 101. You get those beautiful ocean views. If you've gone up the I-5, there's not much to see, is there really? If you appreciate nature, maybe the rolling hills, George, you'd probably love this, right? Of emptiness around there. Really small towns, right? Were you lucky to find a gas station maybe? A couple other a little bigger than that. For the last 4 years, we've been making that drive a number of times during the year to visit our daughter. And this time, about 3.5 hours out of Los Angeles, up that I-5, we approached the Harris Ranch area. So you know what the Harris Ranch area is? That's the area you want to drive through really quickly because you can smell it coming down the road. You don't need any signs at all. It's a place where you roll up your windows, right? And you change the air conditioning to recirculate. And you drive as fast as you can, just hoping there's no CHP by there. And this time, as we're driving by, this time it was a different experience. Rhodey looks over and says, I want you to take a look there because that is a concentration camp for cows. Ugh. Did I explain to you what it's like to be married to a vegan? I have heard these arguments over and over, right? About the reasons not to eat meat, anything that comes from an animal, milk products, eggs. I've heard many times over the consequences of eating the beef on the ecology, on my arteries. I've heard what a poison it is. Every negative argument you can talk to Rhodey, she'll tell you she has given me. Methane gases. You want to talk about methane gases? She'll tell you about methane gases and how they're 23 times worse for the environment than regular CO2. I've heard them all. But when I saw the cows and looked at them differently, I realized that I didn't want to know this part of it. I just didn't want to know how they were being raised for my own pleasure. Because I like a good steak. And all the other arguments were intellectual. I got them, been lectured to, but when I saw this with my own eyes, it's just, I couldn't ignore it. I didn't want to think about how cows are raised so that I could eat them. How many things related to our lives do we not want to see or know about? How many times do we close our eyes to things that are right in front of us? What if you were really to look at the clothes that you're wearing and to think about where they were made and who might have made them, what conditions? As you look at your iPhone or cell phone, not just about how they're made perhaps, but also that they include minerals that are very often mined from what we call conflict mines in the Congo. Conditions that are horrific and brutal to the miners. I've spoken many times about the need to see things in front of us, to see the blessings, because we don't often see those, and the importance, because they bring about joy and celebration, wholeness, right? They bring about the goodness in our lives. I've utilized the Torah portion of this morning of Hagar, right, who is sent out into the wilderness. And she's sent out by Abraham, banished. And Hagar leaves Ishmael when they've run out of water and food under a bush. And she goes to another one nearby. According to the story, God hears the cries of Ishmael, and an angel speaks to Hagar and says, don't worry, everything's going to be okay, don't worry. Then the next verse tells us that God opened her eyes and she saw the well of water. And that water then was able to save their lives. According to the rabbis, God didn't actually create the well at that moment. The well was always there. God just helped to open her eyes so that she could see what was right in front of her. And the rabbis take that as a message about blessings. That we have to open our eyes. If we really work, we can see the blessings that are out there. What about the things we don't want to see? What about the things that we just want to ignore? Is it better that we ignore them and not see them and live happier lives? Or do we need to open them to understand what it truly means to live an honest life? The question I want to explore is, how honest are we with our lives? How honest are you with the lives that you live, the values you claim to espouse? What are the things we don't want to see? Well, I mentioned already about the clothes. I mentioned about the cell phones. What about other things you don't want to see? What about the poverty around us? How many of you, when you drive near freeways, really look to see the homeless encampments? Sometimes they're hard to avoid, but do you really look? Do we want to know how others are living in a country where there should be enough for all? Sometimes it's easier to think about poverty in countries in third world countries, right? So you can say, oh, that's just how life is for them. But here, how can we have such poverty? What about plastic and paper that's used? Convenient packaging products. Whether you use a Keurig pod for your coffee, you order takeout food, order something from Amazon, right? How much packing is there? How much plastic and cardboard is sent to you? And what do you do with it? You put it in the recycling bin, don't you? You put it in that blue bin and you feel really good about that. Your plastics and your paper, and you put it out at the curb. But do you all really know what happens to those plastic and cardboard? We used to send the plastics to China, but they don't want them anymore. Right? Our congressman is right here. Do they want our recyclable trash anymore, Congressman? Maybe Vietnam, of any country. And by the way, they're going to stop it soon as well. You see, other nations around the world are swimming in our trash, even that which we claim is recyclable. So by the way, Los Angeles County Public Works, I found this out, estimated that in 2018, the county sent more than 500,000 tons of plastic, 500,000 tons of plastic to 4 different landfills, not to be recycled. And 20,000 tons of plastic, 20,000 tons sent to waste-to-energy incinerator. You want to feel good about putting that in your plastic bins, don't you, in those blue ones? But in truth, it's not making the difference that you think. You don't want to know that, do you? Makes it a little bit harder to order out dinner or to order a package from Amazon or anywhere else. These are just some of the things we don't want to know about when it comes to impacting our lives. Right? What are the other things you don't want to see or know about? I asked people during the weeks and months before Rosh Hashanah. So here they go. Didn't want to know what really happens behind the scenes in politics. Sorry, Congressman, this was a big one. With all of the wheeling and dealing because they would become too depressed. Congressman, I won't put you on the spot to know that answer. Just hold it, please. Someone said how food is prepared in restaurants. This is from someone, by the way, who never sends her food back to the kitchen. She doesn't want to think about what they're doing to that food. How many of you would actually prefer, don't show by hands, but just in your hearts, that they rather some restaurants not put the calorie count of those meals that you're ordering? Right? You know it's good to know that before you order, but doesn't it just make your meal so much less enjoyable? Right? It probably doesn't stop you, but instead of being happy, you're miserable about that meal. But those are the things you don't want to know. Someone who's pro-choice didn't want to know about late-term abortions that take place. Didn't want to think about that. Some people who don't go to the doctors because they don't want to know what their blood pressure is or their cholesterol count. They don't want to know. Some people don't want to know whether their housekeeper, gardeners, or other employees are in this country legally or not. Some people don't want to see the special needs of their children because it's just too painful. They can't get them in the end the needs that they should have, early assistance. Some people don't want to see the brokenness in their own family because it's too painful. They can't imagine how to fix it. Things all around us. Can you think of something that you just don't want to know about? Something you just don't want to see, to think about? Some of the most painful have to do with relationships with the most important people in our lives. The inability to see how our actions impact them negatively. Right? I didn't talk condescendingly to him. I didn't treat her disrespectfully. I yelled at him because he deserved it. She didn't deserve an apology. Isn't it fascinating that we can see the actions of others so clearly and critically? Aren't you critical about others? You see it so clearly, but when it comes to ourselves, do you really see it? Do you want to see it? Sometimes you just don't want to know how it gets made. Many of you remember when Rabbi Botnick was a rabbi here, and he was also a shochet, right? He was a slaughterer, only small animals. One night we arranged with our monthly program of Guys Night for him to do a ritual slaughtering of some chickens. Well, that was the reaction I got, by the way. Right? People who were complaining about it, they said it's not right for a synagogue to have such an activity at the synagogue. And so I'd ask them, I'd say, well, are you a vegetarian or a vegan? And most of the time they said no. I said, well, don't you want to know or even think about how it gets to you? Nope. And so we had the program that night. You could come voluntarily. We invited some others. By the way, the senior staff here, there was a major rebellion. They threatened to walk around with T-shirts emblazoned with "Free the Chicken." And they actually threatened, it's all true, to kidnap the chickens the night before if they could find them, to save them from their demise. Now, by the way, the chickens that were going to be slaughtered were going to be eaten for food. There was going to be no waste. It was not going to be anything other than how chickens get to people. Interestingly enough, the people there that night, almost everybody watched. About 3 or 4 people chose not to. But what's most interesting is that very few, whether they saw the act or not, left that evening feeling unimpacted. They felt so much different about the process and chicken. Some of them didn't eat chickens for a while, some for even longer. They didn't want to see it, and once they did, it changed how they looked at what they had on their table. Right? The point of the 10 days of repentance is to acknowledge that we can be better. But before we can be better, before we can strive to be better, we have to look around us at the reality of who we are, what we do, and the world. Right? So, I claim to be concerned about the planet. So can I do more to bring less waste into the world? Right? If you hold values that are true, how can you live truer to those values that you espouse? I claim to be concerned about the planet, right? So am I willing to eat less meat? I claim to be concerned about the planet, so do I really need a new iPhone every year or two when a new one comes out? I claim to be concerned about slavery and inhumane conditions, so am I willing to avoid the worst offenders when it comes to buying clothes and other items? I claim to be a family person, but if I really look at how much I spend with my family, do I espouse that value? I think of myself as a generous person. Do I really give enough tzedakah? Even if it means sacrificing a little bit personally. I claim to be respectful But is that reflected in how I talk to people, even the most beloved people around me? In the words of the great philosopher, Rabbi Stein, he wrote, the person who thinks he's arrived is the one who has lost his way. Isn't that beautiful? The person who thinks he's arrived is the one who has lost his way. This is the time of year. It's a time of year to think about what is your journey, what are the values that you actually espouse. Nothing new, but just what you hold in your heart to be true about yourself and about the world. And are you living up to those values? Now, by the way, sometimes the choice between our actions is not so clear. I actually believe it's important to remember that there are a few absolutes in this world when it comes to our actions. It's usually choosing the least objectionable of two options. It often is. The driving an electric car, which I have, right? It doesn't come without its issues. How those batteries are made, how you're going to dispose of them. Right? Nothing is pure. Cloth diapers, which many people espouse as changing the world and not having disposable, but there are actually environmental issues with cloth diapers too, and washing and other things that happen. See, but once we truly open our eyes, so many potential conflicts are there. Because without retreating to a monastery, you have to live in this world. Right? That's just part of what this is about. And so it's not going to be an easy process. So what do? We need to own and feel the conflict. This will prevent a holier-than-thou attitude. I don't like holier-than-thou people on any issue, right? Because it's just not so clear. By the way, just look at the Davos Economic Conference, right, that they held, the Policy Conference Forum. And the theme, one of the major themes was climate change, all right? Now, granted, their goal is to consider climate change on a large level, at a governmental level, at an institutional level. But the fact that there were 1,500 private jets that made their way to Davos, with the most important and influential participants, right, says that nothing is clear-cut, and there are values we hold, and sometimes we're not holding up to those values. We have to strive to be a little bit better. Jewish tradition acknowledges that we often are in compromise. Right? By the way, if you don't know from the Torah, we were created as vegetarians. Right? Actually, vegans. Yes, Rhodey, vegans, I know. Right? And for the first 10 generations, right, we're not allowed to eat meat. Finally, after the flood, according to the Torah, that God acknowledges that we have baser instincts, and in order to understand our nature and in a compromise, we are allowed to eat meat. But once that permission is given, a lot of other things come in place to deal with it. About how you treat the animal, about how you're going to kill the animal, about reciting a blessing, in recognizing that the very eating of meat is a concession to us. Right? How do we go about understanding that compromise? We're all guilty of inconsistency, don't you agree? We all are in our lives. I don't know anybody who's an absolute saint about this. So what am I asking you today? Are you very depressed at this point? About those phones in your purse that are so turned off you've never looked at them once, right? The clothes that you're wearing, the things you're thinking about, the world that can't be changed. There are those who would say, by the way, that my son included, that the world's on fire and we need to do something about it. Right? But it's hard to fix the entire planet. We need to think about it. But I want to talk about it just one step at a time. I want you to think about something in your life, just one area, that you could be truer to the values you hold. I want you to think of an area in which you just don't want to see everything. An area in which somehow there's going to be conflict. I want you to think about what it would mean to change. Just a little bit. Do you recognize the effects of eating meat? Well, you might not become a vegan, but maybe you'll eat less meat and recognize the impact of that. Do Do you recognize the effects of buying the newest iPhone, and maybe you'll hold off and appreciate for what it is? Your clothes, the world, it's one step at a time. That's what I want you to know. The journey, begins with one step. But that's how you start your journey. So I want you to leave here thinking of one area of your life that you can just be better at, more honest with your values. And then you'll try something after that. And Rosh Hashanah is the day on which we celebrate the creation of the world, specifically the day on which humans were created and begin their sojourn on the earth in the Garden of Eden. But that tranquil existence doesn't last long. If you know the story of Adam and Eve are placed in that garden, and what happens? They eat of the fruit. They gain knowledge. They see things now that they couldn't see before. And what do? They hide from God. Or they try to. See, we can't hide. We're actually a people that live in the sense of conflict, right? Our name, Israel, comes from the struggle with God. To be Jewish is to struggle. If you've been worried about that stage of being Jewish, of feeling conflicted and full of angst and guilt, that's not therapy, that's just being Jewish. We live in that tension. May this be a moment in time where you think about those goals. You hold on to Rosh Hashanah, the day of new beginnings. May this be a year of goodness for us all. Let us all say, Amen. We're going to turn to